infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Yeah, on the subject of corroboration, which I feel really lucky to have from Nuna and maybe a couple other people. When I was 5, my dad, made a trip to Utah. He was going to check out, be interviewed for a job in Utah. And I didn't want to move because I'd be moving away from Nuna, but nevertheless. So, and to get from Southern California to Utah, you got to cross the Mojave, which this would have been in 1974 because I was 5 years old. And back then, the Mojave was much more sparsely populated and remote than it is now. The towns like Victorville and Barstow and whatnot were only truck stops. The only sizable thing was Vegas, and you could drive many, many hundreds of miles without even seeing another car. So we're driving along in this late 60s Volkswagen Squareback that barely runs. Imagine the front end of a Carmen Ghia glued to the back end of a station wagon that makes a lot of noise and goes really slow. Anyway, so it's about 3 a.m, and it was in the middle of winter, like January, and we're somewhere north of Vegas, crossing the remotest part of the Mojave. And my dad was driving, my mom was in the passenger seat, and I was on the bench seat behind. 5 years old, I had a TV tray in my lap, and I had Play-Doh to play with to keep myself occupied. I was making snakes, and that's all completely irrelevant, but that's what was happening. So my dad looks in the rearview mirror and says something like, "Holy shit!" And I looked at it, and I see lights. And I looked around back, and there was a very, very, very large craft coming up behind the car, making zero sound, more or less following the course of the highway. And this thing was kind of cross-shaped, kind of like a plus sign, or shaped like a cross, except that the one end wasn't longer than the others. It was symmetrical all the way around. Really, really big. Imagine like 2 aircraft carriers superimposed on each other crosswise, that big, or maybe bigger. I don't know, big. And it had all the way around the perimeter, which is how I could see the shape of it, were alternating red and white lights they weren't flashing, they were unsteady. And it was slowly rotating as it flew counterclockwise, maybe a couple 100 feet off the ground. And it was so big that it was, you had to look from one end of it to the other, and it came up behind the car. And my dad pulled over and stopped to have a look at it, and it got over the car, and this white light shone down on the car from the center of the thing, approximately. It's really weird because it didn't just shine down from the craft. It also seemed, when it hit us, to come from everywhere inside the car. Really bright, pure white, crystal clear light. And I looked up front, and my parents were frozen. My dad had his hands on the wheel, and my mom, had a finger in the air and her mouth open because she was in the middle of saying something when she got froze. And everything was just froze. And the light, that white light, there were no shadows because it was coming from everywhere inside the car, in addition to coming down from the top. And I distinctly remember that it brought out every slightest small detail in everything. I could see the little pieces of dust floating around in the air in front of my mom, where she was just frozen there, like freeze frame on a movie, like if you hit pause on the VCR and they're just sitting there frozen. They took the whole damn car. They pulled the car up into this craft. And we ended up with my parents still in that frozen position. We ended up with the car sitting in a big, it looked like a hangar. I could see it was big and it wasn't very well lit, so I couldn't tell exactly where the boundaries of it were, but I could see off to like my left side, I could see three a little smaller, disc-shaped craft parked, which is why it kind of seemed like a hangar. And the car was in the middle of it, and then there were 5 grays arranged in a half circle around the front of the vehicle, fixated on my parents. And I got the impression that they were keeping my parents in stasis and unaware. And then off to the right was a lit area with some equipment roundabout and some grays over there, and a table, one of the exam tables that I'm familiar with that I'd always ended up on before when I got abducted. And seeing that, I thought the 5-year-old equivalent of "oh hell, not this again." And the gray who I recognized, the same one that I first seen when I was in the sandbox, who was always seemed to be the team leader when I got picked up. He came over and he opened the side of the car door and he took me with him. And again, once they make eye contact, you're just under their control and you don't do anything they don't want you to. So he had me follow him over. It was some distance from the car, had me follow him over to where they had the exam table set up and had me get on it. And he told me, he said, "Don't worry about it. This one's not going to be too long or too difficult. This is just, it's not the same as the other times. This will be brief and you'll be on your way." So he had me climb up on the table and lay down. And then the weirdest thing, a whole bunch of other grays, the smaller variety, like the 3-foot ones, came out and they came up to the table and they surrounded it and they were all touching me with their hands. And I have no idea if this is correct or not, but being in the medical field, the impression I got was they seemed, it was really similar to like when I'm at work and I see a gaggle of brand new medical students follow a veteran surgeon in to see a patient who has an unusual condition, like they're being exposed to something for the first time. I don't know if this is correct or not, but it honestly seemed like a bunch of interns getting their first up close personal look at a human. So that went on for a little while, and then it's weird, I sort of kind of overheard the communication from the team leader grade to the rest of them, was like, "All right, guys, that's enough. Move along, off to the next whatever you're doing." And they all left. And then I got examined a little bit by the usual trio, including the one I always see, except I didn't get stripped naked and nothing invasive happened that time. And then I got put back in the car, and then they set the car back down beside the road, and then the light went off and my parents resumed normal activity, like if you took pause off of the VCR. And then the craft glided off in the same direction it had been going. It came up behind the car and then it just glided off in front of us and went out of sight, still more or less following the course of the road out in the middle of the desert, silently, making no noise. And so we were looking at it and my dad said, "That's not an airplane." And then oddly enough, none of us talked about it for the rest of the trip, which is another thing that I've noticed other people with experiences have happened. They go, "Why don't we talk about this ever? It seems this huge thing and we don't talk about it." But anyway, so fast forward, my dad's passed on now, but I figured he was a chain smoker who was never going to quit. So I knew he was going to pass pretty soon. His lung problems were getting worse and I knew he had only a few years left at best. And I was taking care of him and running errands for him. So I thought, since I know he's going to go pretty soon, I really probably should make sure that I ask him questions and talk about things with him that I want to make sure happens before he's gone, right? So I asked him one day, I said, you remember when we were going to Utah and that really big craft that we don't think was an airplane? He said, you were only 5. You remember that? And I said, yeah, how could I not remember it? And I said, okay, so, all right, so I remember it. And I'm like, okay, well, okay, I don't want to cause a bunch of confirmation bias here. So I said, oh, Dad, explain to me, tell me what you saw. Tell me what you remember. And so he described the craft coming up behind the car, pulling over, and watching it pass. And he described, asked him to explain to me, tell me in detail what the craft looked like. And his explanation of what he saw was exactly the same as what I saw. This big cross-shaped thing, maybe somewhat bigger than 2 aircraft carriers superimposed on each other with the red and white lights all the way around, totally silent, slowly rotating. He remembers it following the course of the road, coming up behind the car, pulling over, watching it pass, being amazed, and then moving on. So his description of the event is everything except when he and my mom were put into whatever kind of stasis that was. He remembered everything except that, and to him it seemed like a seamless event where we just saw the thing come up behind the car, we stopped, we're amazed, watched it pass, and go on. He doesn't remember the part that it seems like he was obviously not supposed to remember because he got froze, and my mom did also. Yeah, and I just didn't tell him about the part that I remembered when he was, that was enough confirmation for me that he remembered all the same parts of it that I did when he was conscious.
And what about what your grandpa said?
My grandpa? Oh yeah, my grandfather worked for Northrop Grumman shortly after World War II until he passed, and he worked on some stuff he can't talk about. This has become more and more interesting since Northrop Grumman is allegedly one of the companies that the government has passed off, crash recovery material to, so that it's with a private company and they can get away from, and then they can legitimately say that they don't have anything, But anyway, my grandpa worked for them for a very long time. And when I asked him questions if he believed that there's life everywhere, and he said, oh yeah, I'm sure there is. And I said, so, I know you were in the military and you worked in aerospace and you worked on secret stuff. I said, and he said, I asked him, I said, well, what do you know? Is there anything you know about this from working where you did? And he said, no, he's like, don't even ask. I can't. I said, well, what can you say? And he told me, well, all I can say without having to kill you is this. He said, when the government finally gets around to releasing what they actually know about non-human life and whatnot, things are going to get real interesting. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Don't ask me anything else.
That's all he'd say.
That's all he'd say.
And that was he said that in the 90s.
Yeah, he said that in the 90s.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, the funny thing is that at work in the medical field, I see lots of patients all day long, right? And, they get to talking about, just to, you ask them questions to make them feel comfortable and you get them telling stories while you're doing whatever you have to do for them. So I've met a few other old aerospace guys that way and get them to telling stories, right? And it's funny because I met another guy approximately my grandpa's age who turned out also worked at Northrop. So I asked him the same questions, and he said it was like, it was so uncanny. He said verbatim the same thing that my grandfather had said a few years earlier. He said, the only thing I can say to you, and don't ask me anymore, is that when the government finally gets around to releasing what they know about these things are going to get real interesting. And
I don't like being that's not a good cliffhanger for me.
No, that could go all kinds of ways. Like, remember those skin suits that I was talking about? Holy smokes, Al, you weren't kidding. I was not expecting all that with the car going up in the craft. And I mean, I could see your mom just with her finger in there and her mouth open, and you could still see the dust particles floating by her, but there's nobody home.
Right. They were paused.
Did you ever talk to your mom about that?
No. My dad has he's seen a few other things too. He kind of has an irrational fear of, well, I don't like to use the word aliens, but he calls them that, so I'll use that word this one time. And he used to, in the first house when we were poor, we're right across the street from Nuna. He'd wake up and he'd go out in the front like 3 a.m. He'd wake up to go out for a smoke because he couldn't go all night without smoking. And he said this one time. He went out there and he said he convinced himself it's a bad dream and he doesn't want to talk about it anymore. But he told me one time that he was out there and he said he saw a small craft come down and land in the street right in front of the house. And
by the cow field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that the side of it opened up and he said this thing came out, and what he didn't know what to call it, but what he describes, this is a spot-on description of a mantid. And he said that it locked eyes with him and then he couldn't move. And he was so scared that he thought he was going to wet himself, but he couldn't move. And he said that it kept him frozen like that, but conscious, and then it walked past him into the house.
Oh, gosh.
And the next thing he knew, he was waking up the next morning in bed. So he said, no, it must have been a bad dream. It must have been a bad dream. But I'm like, yeah, but you weren't asleep when it started. You were out on the porch having a smoke at 3 a.m. But I didn't mention that to him because I'm not into scaring people when they just don't want to think about something. So.
Right. You're like, little did you know, it for a moment turned into my great-grandmother and then back into the mantis. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, but that wasn't the same night that happened to me. It was years earlier, but it just, I mean.
Yeah, we've heard other people say, it's like, oh, I would love to have an encounter. I'd love for them to take me. And it's like, well, be careful what you wish for, because it's not fun and games for everybody. And, maybe just playing devil's advocate and saying, well, maybe they aren't doing harm and it's for a greater good. They just can't tell us about it yet, like when you do things with animals, right? But it can be very terrifying, I actually I mentioned earlier, I did a regression on that one memory because I wanted to hear what the star person was telling me, because it seemed really important. And so I did a regression. I really didn't know too much about the process. Al came and sat in with me, so he was present when it was done. This fabulous lady did it, and she had absolutely zero, nothing was suggestive, nothing was leading. It was just simply, go back to this memory when you're on this craft with this person looking out the window, and what else do you see? And that was it. And the thing that really blew my mind was that, so I'm seeing it third person. So it's like I'm further back in this big round room, and I see my 4-year-old self standing and looking out the window in my pajamas, standing next to the little gray and the star person. And they're about 20 feet away. I'm looking at myself, like the back of me, as a 4-year-old. So the hypnotherapist said, so go ahead and ask your question. If you're in the right place with the right people, then. And so I asked the person, and I said, I can't hear what you're telling me. Can you repeat it? I see, this is so mind-blowing. I see the star person turn to my 4-year-old self and say, I'll be right back, which is what I remember as a 4-year-old. And then he walks away from her and walks up to me and stands really close. I see him full in the face, and I can still see my 4-year-old self over his shoulder. And he said, you don't get to know that right now, which was really frustrating. And then he went back over, went to my 4-year-old self. Well, my natural memory from when I was 4 is that he was standing there talking to me, then said, I'll be right back. And then he walked away, but I didn't look behind me to see what he was doing. So he basically was talking to me at 4 and at 50 something.
Wow. That's mind-bending.
Yeah, it took me a minute. Took a minute. So, I mean, I'm not, find regressions to be really interesting and all, but I thought that was really interesting, and I was very disappointed because I really wanted more information. So this whole thing about just, nobody's told what's going on, even the Cree history and what I've been told by my elders and how we regard all of these things, even I know a lot of people really want to seek out traditional people to try to get information, but no one really has all of it. It kind of reminds me of, if you've ever seen the movie Memento, it's kind of like you're living that life where there's just bits and pieces everywhere, and you're always trying to put all the notes together and figure out, well, this person saw a different kind of being than this person, and this was a positive, this was a negative experience. Some people like us seem to have a hell of a lot of experiences, and then some people don't recall anything. So yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, nowadays we don't really have, it kind of does. If you backed me in a corner and made me define it, I would say it feels like we aged out of some kind of program, or whatever's going on is not, they're either done or they've moved on to something else. But we do get a hell of a lot of shadow people stuff going on that seems to have replaced it. And we have 2 dogs, and they see stuff all the time. They react to stuff all the time too.
And the shadow people, this is out of the corner of your eye? Are they standing in the corner of your room? What's the level of malevolence or benevolence on their part?
It's kind of all of those things. There's a lot of movement out of the corner of your eye, and the dogs see it too. There's a lot of, it's kind of similar to the whole, okay, I know I'm seeing that, but for some reason somebody's just, saying, no, just go back to sleep. I've seen dark figures standing in the bedroom a lot when I'm trying to sleep. I've seen them pass down the hallway. I used to have a really hard time with, I would say, insomnia, but it's more about being hypervigilant at night. So I'm kind of a night owl anyway. So I've seen a lot, and I don't know why. Why is it when the sun goes down? I mean, I've seen things during the day too, but not as much.
Sometimes we see them at the same time too. And then there's this deep sigh like, oh, you saw it at the same time as me? Well, shit, that means it's real, and I didn't want it to be.
That would be my thought too. I'm like, no, don't say the same thing. Dang it, you did it. You went and
He's
did
like,
it.
I'm like, yes.
So, I mean, because, and of course, this is a can of worms, right? And it's hotly debated and contested, but what we've talked about up until now is, and I'm not trying to diminish the experiences, of course. I'm just saying what we've talked about till now is just classic abduction experiences, and now that you say you've aged out of that, now we've got shadow people. So to you guys, since you've been through all this stuff, are you of the mind then that these are just, I mean, two different things that, oh, well, these fell out of interest with us, so now these things are interested in us, or are they the same thing somehow?
We talk about that a lot. And I think the general consensus is we actually think everything under the umbrella of paranormal is all related. And it's not to say that we didn't have shadow people experiences when all of the abduction stuff was going on. We did.
Okay.
I kind of feel like because the other stuff is more in your face and really obvious, that now that stuff isn't going on anymore, that the shadow people are just, that activity is more noticeable.
That makes sense.
Because it's much quieter now. And honestly, if
we're free to notice some of the more subtle things now that the in their face stuff isn't
nothing's being shoved up your nose, and that's nice.
Yeah,
The last time I was physically taken anywhere was in February of 2017 that I know of, so it's been a while.
Yeah, and then
Al, that was a. I mean, can you, as much as you want to, of course, walk me through that last time? Was it the volume turned down for that one as far as the physicality and the invasiveness, or was it just the last big hurrah from them?
Actually that time they did take me when I was asleep, and I woke up. So I'll mention that the gray that seems to be the team leader whenever they come to get me.
I call him the case manager.
Yeah. He's always has the two smaller ones assisting. I call him Sandy because the first time I saw him was in my sandbox. I mean, I don't know, but he has it. It's not his name. I just made that up so that my English-speaking brain can have a referent when I'm thinking about him or talking about him, right? So I call him Sandy because I first saw him in the sandbox. So I woke up with a start, a panic wake up on the table with two of the smaller. Actually, this time it was two on each side, the smaller grays, and him at the head with my head in his hands and his fingers like kind of over my face. So I woke up like, blah! And it's you guys. Okay, well, all right. It was very frightening to wake up that way. But then I realized who it was that had me, and remembered that, this happened plenty of times before, and I'd get returned in one piece. So I thought, well, hey, as long as I'm like not out, I'm going to see if I can ask him some questions. So I said, hey, what are you guys doing? I really want to know more. Can I be awake this time around for some of this? And, I'm not speaking with my mouth. I was thinking it at him because I've learned that, you can do that. And his reply back was, no, not this time. What we're going to do is it would hurt too much and I don't want you to feel it. And I was, man, okay, whatever. So then they put me in, but then, they didn't put me all the way out. It was kind of like Twilight, and I did feel it. And that was one of the times where they put the thing up my nose, and it went way up there, and it had the little BB thing on it, and it came out without the little BB thing on it. When it went up there, I felt it hit bone up behind my right eye and crunch, and it hurt really bad. And then I could hear, not hear with my ears, but you can, if they're close to each other on either side of you, it's, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like you kind of intercept some of the stream of consciousness when they're communicating back and forth. I know it's not hearing, but the best word I have is you can overhear it. One of them said to the other, that's really gonna be bothering him for about 3 or 4 days, referring to what they had just did, the thing I had stuck up my nose. And he was correct, because for about 3 days after that, I had this really sharp pain up behind my right eye, and I kept having sneezing fits and nosebleeds after that. And then another thing that happened, really interesting thing that happened during that one abduction, is I have asthma, and I was having a fair amount of trouble with that at the time. I had some bronchitis and a cough that just could not get rid of. And I could feel them somehow, I don't know, I could feel them examining me from head to toe internally. Weird. I don't really have an explanation for it, but they paused over my airway. And I heard one of them say, "Oh, this will never do. We need him to remain functional / alive for much longer than this." And they did something over my chest, and it felt all warm. And then the next day, the asthma bronchitis problem that had been getting out of control was just gone. That never happened before. It doesn't disappear unless I go get a round of steroids, but this time it was just, the next morning I woke up and it was gone, and I was just fine. And then this was shortly before we moved out of state, and I got the impression that this last visit and whatever they did inside my head had something to do with us moving. Like I was going to be. It's vague, but the communications that I was kind of overhearing from them was that they had to do something because I was moving out of this particular group's like jurisdiction or operational area or something like that. And so it's vague, but it seemed like when they were communicating with each other, it seemed like it had something to do with the fact that I was no longer going to be in the area where they'd been working with me before.
And you can tell the difference. So Sandy, we got Sandy, right? Sandy was always around as the case manager. I like that, Nuna. You can tell the difference between, say, Sandy and another gray, like Bob, Bob or whoever. You can tell the difference physically?
Well, yeah, there's two kinds that I'm familiar with. There's little lighter colored ones that are about 4 feet tall. And then there's the 3-footers that are a little bit darker gray. And whenever they show up, they always seem to be in threes, and it always seems to be the 4 foot, about 4 foot lighter colored one, and the two of the 3-footers who they seem more robotic and autonomous and almost like they're functioning as extensions of the taller one.
Okay.
And I don't.
But you recognize.
I recognize him.
One.
I recognize him. He feels like a person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The other littler ones don't feel like people. I can't tell one of them.
Yeah, they feel like robots.
Yeah, I can't tell one of them from another, but other times when I've come across grays that are not him, and I can tell the difference. I don't know how you tell the difference.
That's interesting.
Because it's all internal, but it's almost like recognizing a face.
Al, have you ever seen a Nordic in any of your experiences?
I have not.
Okay, because that's also of interest to me because of what Nuna has been told about you guys being in different programs.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder if that, what's that about? Is that part of, the Nordics aren't part of your deal over here, Al, Have you ever thought or been regressed? Have you ever thought to do that?
Yeah, I have to try to get a clearer, just to try to recall some details that maybe I couldn't. But most of 99% of what I remember, I just remember it. The same way that I remember other stuff from my own personal history, like what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Right.
Yeah, he kind of has a semi-photographic memory. I think it's because he's on the spectrum. I'm not sure, but
well, my short-term memory is not so great, but I have a much better than average long-term historical memory.
See, and that's very
that's being autistic. So
well, and maybe that goes back to maybe that's something they missed, or either that or they just didn't care that you could remember that much, that you have this photographic memory, right?
Right.
I something that comes up a lot too, especially with other people we've talked to, is you know, why bother, even allowing you to remember anything when they're not going to tell you everything?
Right.
Like, I'm annoyed that I have this memory and everything's great and I remember everything in detail except that one point of where he's obviously telling me something important, and then I get to ask him later to, can you repeat that, because I can't hear it in my memory, and they said no, or you're not allowed to know what we're doing, or no one else is allowed to know, what they're doing. I find that to be, as a professional researcher myself, I find that to be highly unethical, and there better be a really good reason for it. Because when you're left in the, human nature is, if you're left in the dark, you fill in those blank spaces with the worst possible things sometimes.
Yeah. And as a medical professional, I have ethical objections to this whole thing too, because in my profession, informed consent is the prime directive.
Yep, absolutely.
You don't do anything if you don't have informed consent.
Yes.
And they definitely don't have informed consent from me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I'm not informed.
And you sure as hell did not give no consent.
Right. I'm not informed and I didn't consent.
No, absolutely not. And, that's the overarching theme of most all of this stuff. And, you brought up Travis Walton, and he's one that, as far as I know, he hasn't had ongoing experiences after that one big one that, changed his whole life. As far as I know, right? He hasn't had the ongoing stuff like you guys and many others. Why do you guys have this ongoing, sometimes very horrific stuff? How? I know that Nuna said that she's, night owl, and you say you have insomnia, and you're trying to say you're a night owl, but I would hazard to say that I would probably be the same way, like trying to stay up and see who's gonna shove me through the window or the wall. Like, this sucks. How else has this all changed both of your everyday lives? I don't know if I'd be sleeping with the lights on. Not that that would help, but hey, we all have these mental blankets that we like to tuck into, right? How has this changed things for you guys, do you think? Even though I know it's been going on your whole lives.
I have really bad PTSD. It's somewhat better since I've gotten some counseling for it, and I can tell you it's kind of hard to find a therapist that you can talk to about these things. They do exist, but there are therapists who know this is real, but they don't advertise because of their professional reputation. You have to find them by word of mouth through other abductees. Yeah. So I've had somebody help me with that. But yeah, I have very bad PTSD. Nuna will be very careful not to wake me up gently, right? Mm-hmm. Because if I get startled out of sleep, I will come up swinging and maybe cold cock somebody before I know what I did. When we are, she does too have bad PTSD. When we go out to eat, nobody knows what we're doing, but we always sit so that we can both watch each other's backs. I never sit with my back to a doorway. I never wear shoes that I can't run or fight in.
Me too.
If I'm by myself anywhere in a room, I've always got my back to a wall so that I can see every possible approach. Even when I was a kid, when I was in high school, if I was out and about by myself, I would often, if I wanted to read a book or something, I would usually, they thought I was just a kid who liked to climb trees, but no, I would go way up in a tree so that I could see in every direction anything approaching long before it ever got to me.
We know somebody that actually moved out of Washington and to Arizona as soon as they became an adult because they had pretty horrendous ongoing abduction experiences as a kid, where they would lure him out into the forest that was on their property, and he wanted to get the hell away from trees for the rest of his life. He moved to the desert, and it kind of feels like that you're living a secret life that you can't talk about when you're in public a lot of times. Just when you go to work and You'll be driving down the road, you'll be sitting at a stoplight, and I look over at the people next to me and I wonder, so what's going on in their house at night? Do they remember having experiences? That has everybody on the planet had experiences, but maybe only half of us remember. You always feel like it's like you're in the what's that program where like you change your name and you
the witness protection program.
Yeah, it's like you can't you can't tell your coworkers about it. You can't, but you want to, because maybe if they're an experiencer and they're further back on the road where you used to be, it would be nice to help other people, cope and make them feel like they're not alone. But you do risk, it pulls, like I said before, it pulls out your rug of reality out from underneath you from a young age. If you're in a family that's trying to teach you to be in their religion, well, then this doesn't mesh with that, and then it's fits a little more in on my tribal beliefs, but there's not all the answers. And then there's people around us. We have friends that know nothing about this at all. Like, we always throw out we'll just throw it out there. Hey, have you ever seen anything weird that you can't explain? Some of them absolutely put the wall up. Nope, absolutely not. And they move on, and you don't mention this shit to them.
Right.
On the other hand, we've both been at work before and thrown that same thing out. And you'll have like a doctor or a cop, or, we've met people from all walks of life that are experiencers. They look both ways at work and they're like, actually, I did have this thing that happened, and I'm so glad you asked, because I don't have anyone else to talk to about it. And I saw this craft in the sky, and I pulled over and looked at it, and now I have missing time, and I'm so confused, but I don't know anyone else that openly talks about it. And then you've been working next to them for 10 years and had no idea.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's things that answer your question, like little things. There's probably tons of them that we're so used to now that I can't even think of them.
Right. When you said, though, that you both wear shoes you can run in, a chill went up my spine. That's holy cow. I mean, really.
Never. If I'm in a suit, you're going to see athletic shoes on my feet. It's weird.
Hey, that's a style, right?
Yeah, I won't wear shoes run or fight in, because you never know what's going to happen, and you might not see it coming, and that could be the difference between whether you survive the day or not.
Well, we also really appreciate each other. We've met a lot of married people who they've absolutely said, if I mention even one thing that's happened to me, like the least, event that has happened to me, to my spouse, they will instantly divorce my ass. They have, we're really lucky that we do have each other to talk to. And, it's a nice sanity check to talk to other people too. You just have to be really, I don't know. For some people, it's their job. They can risk losing their job. Like the person we knew that was in Homeland Security. And, we've got a good friend we know, retired law enforcement. They've got stories that they would never, ever tell when they were still working. And so, yeah, like we said, what you do is I think it's really appreciated by a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And in fact, my aunt, she's actually the one that turned me on to your show. She's been listening to you for a long time. Misty, she might be a Patreon. I'm not sure.
She is. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Misty. Misty is a Patreon member. That's so cool.
Yeah,
cool. You know the name.
She's my aunt. personally, I think she's an experiencer. We have a lot of synchronicity going on, even though she's halfway across the continent from me. We do have a lot of stuff that happens, like our friend that I saw on the craft as a kid that I was talking about. If we have some weird stuff going on in the house, like really odd, like really strong shadow people, something or other, or sometimes we'll see like a flash of bright white light in a dark room that is not, we live in a place where car lights can't get in our bedroom, stuff like that. And I swear every time something like that happens, I'll get a text from him from another state. He lives in another state from us. He's like, yeah, I had weird stuff going on last night. It's like, oh, so did we. In fact, he came to visit us one time up here, and I heard him, like at 3 a.m, I heard him come out of his room down the hall. And I looked out to see like if he was okay. Did he need anything? He was staying in our house for a couple days. And I saw him looking into the living room with his mouth hanging open. And he sees me and he's pointing over there. And we both saw what looked like a human shape and size, really black shadow person walk across the living room and exit through the double doors to the outside. And what's funny is I'd seen that in that house before, but I hadn't told anybody. So it seems like a lot of experiencers, I don't know, maybe you've heard from others that there seems to be some kind of connection in some way.
Now, when he goes back home, does he have shadow people going on in the house, but less quote unquote alien activity, the same as you guys?
Yeah, it's pretty identical. And he and his wife have had experiences together too. I believe their families, it's kind of seems like it tends to run in families too. I know some of their families had some experiences. So in fact, I think if I count just in Al's family alone, he's got his adult son, his great grandmother, his father, his grandfather, that have all had experiences, but they didn't talk about it when he was a kid. So it wasn't like, that was kind of like a source that was planted in his head and he ran with it because he's, fantasy prone or something. It was something that he found out from them when later as an adult. So it's really interesting how it kind of, again, it makes me think that maybe everyone is an experiencer, but not everybody remembers.
Also, bringing up the whole government thing, we know that our own government is very compartmentalized, and it seems like their programs are also quite compartmentalized as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Because of this whole, beyond the whole we don't talk about it thing, our government says the same thing, but that's the whole reason they keep it compartmentalized so stuff doesn't get leaked out. People can't talk to each other. They don't even know the other person's in the program, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. So it's strange how there is some mirroring going on there.
Yeah. I had this really odd, I don't even know how to categorize this. I had this really interesting experience that, I don't even know how to label it, but when I heard about remote viewing, it seems like that fits how it felt in the description, but I had a really stressful job and I decided that I was gonna, get more into meditating just for, calming my brain when I'm not at work. I was working with a lot of violent, mentally ill people. And so I got into meditating more, and not the meditation as a tool for a jumping off point for something else, but it was strictly for relaxation. And I hadn't gone down the rabbit hole yet into reading about other people's experiences and discussions on government program. Like none of that stuff was on my radar at the time. And I was doing a really, really long meditation session. All of a sudden, it was like watching a movie. It was really strange. It was like all of a sudden I was in this place, or I mean, I didn't look behind me. I don't know that I could say I was in it, but it was at least like watching a very clear movie, full color in front of me. I had an eye mask on, so you could totally relax your face. And if you opened your eyes, it was totally black. And I saw what I would describe as a facility that was underground, because you could see the rock hewn out on the walls and the ceiling, and those, what do you call those? I don't know, they have them in mines and underground buildings and such. The cable that goes overhead and has the caged lights on the ceiling every so many feet.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a man that was walking away from me, like down a hallway. I saw his back, but he was in a navy colored military outfit, which looked like an officer because he had the round hat with the brim, and he had some bars on his shoulders. And I was assuming it was American, but I really didn't have anything else to go on. And I realized that I could hear what he was thinking a little bit. I got kind of like an impression, kind of like a flavor, like, you know, what Al said, instead of like real words. And what I got from him was intense fear as he looked to his right and he was passing by an open doorway, because down this hallway there were many doors all the way down for a very long distance. And I really had a strong feeling I was underground for sure. And he kept his composure, but he felt terrified on the inside as he looked to his right and then started walking by faster. And I looked over at what he was looking at, and there was an open door, and standing in the doorway watching this guy walk by was a person who was really tall. I would say 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. And he was an absolute brick house of a being. He was huge. He was very muscular and solid, and he looked like what people describe as a reptilian. And he just absolutely looked terrifying to me. And he looked at this human with, what I picked up was, you know, I could squash you right now, and I hate humans or whatever, but we have a joint something we're working on kind of thing. I'm really confused because I don't know how this is happening. I couldn't try to do this again. I wasn't trying to do anything. It was like a total shock to me. But what was really unnerving to me is the other guy didn't know I was there, but when I was looking at this reptile person, he turned and looked right at me, and he was startled that I was there. And then he got really enraged, and basically I got told to F off. And you didn't have to tell me twice. I was like, nope. And I ripped my mask off, and I was like, you know, squeezing my hands and trying to just become really present as fast as I could. And I sat there for a very long time trying to figure out what happened. Now, we do have some traditional ceremonies that we've done in private ceremonies with my grandparent that they took me to, that are kind of similar. You know, some of our medicine people can do things like this, but it's not generally taught to everyone. And the closest I could find after we both kind of went down the rabbit hole and went, okay, you can only talk amongst two people for so many years. And then we decided, like we said, to get out there and let's read things, watch things, listen, let's go to some things. I want to hear what everyone else is experiencing. And that's where I learned about remote viewing. And I thought, wow, that sounds really, really similar to what I experienced, but it was a total accident. I have no idea how that happened, where it was, what I was looking at, but I always thought it was really interesting, and it was a bit terrifying, honestly. I don't think I've ever met another person that had so much hate and rage. It was very off-putting. So I thought I would mention that because it seems like a lot of experiencers and even non-experiencers, some people, it seems like once they have one kind of experience, not abduction, but anything, it seems like maybe because they might all be related or happen on a certain level, that you start to have other ones, even if they're not similar types of experiences. And honestly, me personally, I believe that we are not our body. We're not a soul with a body. We're a body with a soul, that we are the soul. So there's all kinds of things that can happen on different levels. So because of that, I don't feel like any of this is woo. It doesn't surprise me that people talk about Bigfoot and talk about that maybe they have telepathy, or, you're able to be passed through a window on an abduction. And it all just seems all related. And I think a lot of times things seem maybe scarier or more confusing than it really is, because as humans, we're so into believing that anything beyond the physical is just conjecture, so I thought I'd just throw that out there too.
I mean, I guess at least thank goodness for small favors, as they say, at least in that, I would agree, probably remote viewed. At least in that remote viewing session is the only time you saw the 8-foot tall reptilian built like a brick shithouse, and he wasn't coming to visit you or taking you out, to the crafts. At least there's that. You guys mentioned that things had calmed down for you both and you went your separate ways and everything. And then after marriage, even on your honeymoon, you're going, oh, great. Look, there's a gray, like, F you guys, what the hell? Well, after that, did it then kind of just stay in, a straight line with, seeing one here or there, and then it dropped off into the shadow people? Or, what was the timeline with that kind of stuff?
Well, at least for me, visits from grays got less frequent. I mean, I've encountered them again after the February 2017, the last time I was physically taken anywhere. They've showed up and done things to me without taking me anyplace.
It's like they were just checking in or
monitoring. And that there's actually a thing that I would like Shannon's opinion on. How are we on time?
Oh, you guys are good. Go right ahead.
Okay. So I'll make them as brief as I can, so I don't run on forever and ever. So there was another after that time. There was this one time where hilarious aside, Nuna does not have insomnia on the nights when I get taken or when they show up and do things to me.
Yeah, that's true. Most of the time.
And neither do the dogs. Everybody stays asleep, and there I am looking at these guys standing next to the bed, right? So, but anyway. Yeah. Fine. I wake up. There's somebody in the room with me. I feel like I turn over and there they are. There's Sandy. He's standing there next to the bed and with his two lovely little assistants, right? He makes eye contact. There we go. I'm stuck. And the one to his right is holding a device that I've heard described by other people before. It's like a chrome colored, about the size of a microphone, like with a knob on one end and 2 or 3 silver buttons on it. And he's furiously manipulating that. And then the other guy on his right has a thing about the size of a Rubik's Cube in his hand, and he holds it straight up overhead. But this thing, there's like, it's shifting around and changing its configuration, almost like it's the intrusion of a multidimensional object into our 3D space is the only way I can describe it. And it has some kind of a light source in it. And he's holding that up there, and I'm frozen, and this thing in his hand is furiously changing around, and the other guy is standing next to him on the other side with his little silver device. And Sandy's got his eyes locked on me so I can't move, and I can feel them. I can feel that cubic device doing something to me internally. I don't know what, but I can feel it. Yeah, for lack of a better word, it's almost like on a spiritual level. I can feel it, like I felt like I was being taken apart, rearranged, and put back together differently internally. And Nuna just made me be still because this is really disturbing and I'm kind of fidgeting. But
no, you have a noisy chair.
Yeah, that too. And yeah, the next day she said that she actually woke up and was aware that they were there and tried to turn over but couldn't.
Yeah, there's no putting me to sleep naturally. That
Right.
just doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
and so I have no idea what that was about. I don't know what that thing was he was holding. I don't know. I mean, I recognize the silver device, but I don't know what it does, and I have no idea what the purpose of that was. But it was doing something to me, and internally, like on a psychological or spiritual level, I felt that thing, like I said, that he was holding up. I felt like I got disassembled, rearranged, and put back together again, and then they left, and that's not really an adequate explanation, but it's the best I can do, and that's weird as hell. And then, so the thing I would like, Shannon, your opinion about. So I was, and this was in California. So on a Thursday night, I was in the backyard sitting on my favorite rock meditating. Again, I don't meditate as an effort to do anything ESP or remote viewing or supernatural or anything. I don't do any of that. It's an exercise to deal with PTSD, and also to calm down because of the nature of my work as well.
And it helps with Asperger's syndrome.
Yeah, it helps. Yeah, it also helps me act less.
Symptoms.
Helps with the symptoms. It helps me focus and act less autistic, which can be annoying to people. So I'm sitting there, and I thought, I'd been there for an hour or so, and I was very quiet. It was nighttime. And I thought, I'll try something here, right? I thought, I'm going to make a request. So I just kind of tried to reach out to Sandy or whoever else, might be listening. And I said, guys, something that would really help me out a lot. The last time anything like this happened, we were children. I said, it would really be helpful to me if I and Nuna, at the same time as her, in broad daylight, in our normal state of consciousness, none of this funny business with freezing us or putting us in twilight, or, not showing up at night when somebody could discount it by saying it's sleep paralysis, no funny business. I want to see in full daylight at the same time as her, with her, something that's undeniable, right? I said, that would really help me out mentally, guys, Could you do something like that for me? And then I reached the end, and I've done meditating. I'm walking back in the house, and I was saying to myself, Al, this is ridiculous. What do you think you are? You can't contact ETs by meditating in your backyard. That's stupid. That's what I was saying to myself. This is ridiculous. What do you think you're doing? This is silly. So I didn't tell Nuna about it. This was on a Thursday night. So then 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, we're in the dining room, sitting there with our coffee, having our usual Saturday morning conversation at about 11 a.m. And there's no way in hell we're going outside because it's July and it's 125 degrees in the shade, except there's no shade. And I'm looking out on the patio and I see something out there that I've never seen before. I see shadows of several dragonflies flitting around. I can see them on the pavement. Looking around. And Nuna says, well, those are messengers. That means we need to go out there and pay attention, right? Because in her culture, when dragonflies show up unexpectedly, it means something. And you need to pay attention. And I've learned that when she says things like that, it's real, and I need to pay attention. So
like the owls we see all the time.
Yeah. So okay, so we picked up our coffee and we went out there on the 125-degree patio, which we would never have done otherwise, and look up at the dragonflies who have never been there before. So we're standing out there looking up around, wondering, why are we supposed to be out here? And a disc-shaped craft, disc-shaped silver craft, does a flyby.
Right where you're looking.
Right where we're looking up. Goes over the house from one horizon to the other. And, I did. And Nuna's looking at it and she says, are you seeing this? I'm like, yeah, I'm seeing it. Right? I'm seeing it. And then another one went by and did the same thing. And I don't know if it matters, but I did a little bit of math, giving the distance that I saw them travel and the time it took them to traverse it, comparing it to like an aircraft going the same direction. And they were going about 20,000 miles an hour, give or take.
They stopped on a dime.
Yeah, stopped on a dime and then kept going again.
That's crazy.
So, all right. And then I realized, well, that would be exactly what I asked for while I was meditating 2 days before. And I have trouble with this because I'm not saying that I'm some special guy who can summon UFOs while meditating. Like I said, I don't feel special. I don't really think that I'm important enough for somebody to, for some busy ET to alter their flight plan, just so I can see it with Nuna at the time, you know what I mean? Just because it would ease my mind a little bit. But nevertheless, so I don't know. Shannon, what do you think? Do you think that was just coincidence? Or do you think I got like an answer to my request?
I don't really see how it could be a coincidence, because not only did you make the request and they came through with it in broad daylight, but the mechanism to get you guys outside was directly related to Nuna's beliefs of dragonflies being messengers. And she's going, okay, we have to go outside. Like, it could have been 4 big old, those huge bumblebees, or, I don't want to accidentally pick something else. It would be a messenger, but I'm trying to go off messenger here, like a June bug, or 4, I don't know what, sparrows just flitting about. I don't know. But the fact that it was Nuna's going, okay, those are messengers. We have to go outside now. And then they're out there just showing off for you guys. And that's exactly what you asked for. I don't see how that could be a coincidence. That's actually pretty incredible. And this goes back to the whole, they don't ask permission and they're really huge assholes sometimes. But in this case, they cared enough about your request because you said, you know what, for my mental health, it would be really cool if you guys did this for me. They did it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the thing that, but you know what, maybe given their kid, for us to arrange something like that, it would be a logistical nightmare. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's about near impossible. But I'm thinking about the capabilities they have, given their technology and their telepathy abilities. The telepathic ability, it's probably non-local. Distance in space and time probably doesn't matter for them to be able to connect with someone that they want to and communicate. So given that, and given that their technology, they can travel anywhere they want to pretty much instantly. They could, with those abilities, they could easily arrange any kind of event that would look magical to us.
Right.
And it wasn't that much of a inconvenience to their schedule, right?
No, that's just them. There's a stop on the way to the grocery store. We're going to go show off to Nuna and Al real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, let's help them out, right?
Yeah.
So
that's incredible. And it gives me hope that, that they care a little bit. They're not just there to traumatize you and make you wear running shoes with your suits, and because you need some kind of a reprieve from the darkness. You just have to.
Yeah. And the first time that I saw the gray I call Sandy in the sandbox, I got from him really actually that he liked me, and a lot of regret and sadness about the discomfort and trauma that he knew was in my future that he was going to be causing. I distinctly got that from him. So it's, yeah, I don't know. I don't think this phenomenon isn't all bad. It's not all good. I think we've got visitors, and they have their own agenda, and they're.
Mm-hmm.
But do they have bosses? Is there something even bigger than them?
Probably.
Which is, there's all kinds of speculation with that, and that's getting really,
right.
That's another, conversation. But that's where my mind goes. I'm like, well, where does the hierarchy stop?
Well, yeah, if they're people with better than tech than we have, then they're probably just as ambiguous and complex as we are.
Right.
I mean, think about just as a human being. You don't get to be totally ethical all the time. Every day you have to choose. At some point, you have you have to choose the lesser of two evils, or decide something you're going to do that's going to be less harmful when you don't have when something has to be done, and you don't have the option of picking something that's completely good. You've got to just do the best you can because something has to be done. I imagine that. I don't imagine that and most of them are probably not all good or all bad. Any more than we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think I would add to your previous question about how does it change your day-to-day, stuff. And, we both used to work in the same hospital where he was in the ER. And so he would handle the medical stuff, and then I would come in behind with some of the patients and address the psychiatric side of it. So, we would have patients coming in with the cops, and they're handcuffed to the gurney, or they're in a straitjacket, or they're in the, psych ward. That a lot of people don't know that a lot of ERs do have a psych ward in the back. We've come across patients who will sit there in all seriousness. They'll be really upset, and they will repeat some of our exact same experiences to all the staff around them, wanting somebody to listen to them. But they've come in on a 72-hour hold, or so that part of it is, I find to be very tragic, and it's very upsetting, because you want to take off your employee hat and put on your human hat and an experiencer hat and talk to them. And sometimes we do find ways of doing that without getting fired. But that's really interesting when you walk into a psych ward and some of the people there are there because they're saying that they've had our same experiences.
Well, that must really break your heart then, and then you're kind of going, I totally get it. And they have no one to talk to. And, there's only a tiny handful of people that are going to believe them. And unfortunately, if their family put them there or whatever the circumstances were, that's probably not going to change.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, at least now, counselors do get extra cultural training, where if I go into a psychiatrist and I say, hey, I'm having trouble with PTSD because I've had experiences with star people, I can't sleep, blah, blah, whatever I'm going to say, if I present as non-tribal, then they're going to want to prescribe me medication. If I present as tribal and explain that some of these beliefs are also from my culture, then they have to regard that as normal for you. And so they won't pursue the same treatment. But I know there have been many times when Al's come home and said, yeah, I had a, unnamed, because we don't want to violate HIPAA, right? But, I had a patient today who said that they were taken through their window by grays, and the doctors and staff were rolling their eyes and treating them, like less than.
Right.
But you find ways to tell them on the side when nobody's around, I believe you. And it seems to change a lot for them in that moment. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been interesting job.
Al, just zipping back real quick. No pun intended, sorry. But that craft that you essentially, I mean, if we're being real, I know that people are going, well, he did CE5, they're going to go at least use the name, because people have certain thoughts about Dr. Greer and CE5. So there, I said it. You essentially did the CE5 protocol, if that's what you want to say, without knowing it. Have you ever tried that again? Did that kind of freak you out? Do you think, well, maybe I should give that a shot again? Or I don't know.
Well, I think it should be important to mention that I knew nothing about CE5 the night that I tried that. I hadn't heard of it yet. So yeah, I guess I accidentally did CE5. But no, I haven't tried it again. Really haven't wanted to for some reason. I feel like it just seems like the wrong thing to do. Like, not exactly like I'd be taking advantage, but that how do I express this? I feel like I'd be abusing the privilege if I asked again. Does that make any sense?
Right. Yeah, it does. You weren't. They weren't tasked with you at that point, but they ended up seeing you that day anyway, because of what you asked.
Yeah, I mean, it did, because in the past, other times when I, had the opportunity to ask, like, would you guys just drop in for tea or something and just sit, and the answer is no. It's very dangerous for them here.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's the truth or not, but if it is, then maybe they did take some risk to arrange that for me, if in fact that's what happened, right? Making themselves visible.
Yeah, we could clearly see them both.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing.
Well, and one of your early stories about the craft over the house, and you're in the craft, and then there's some kind of an impact. I don't know if I've ever heard anything quite like that before. And so maybe that goes along with what you're saying about it's dangerous for them here. Who knows if it's the atmosphere and the way their crafts interact with it, or just them physically. I mean, yeah, that's extremely interesting.
Well, I do know at one point I did have an elder that told me that part of the star persons, as in there's more than one star nation out there. There's many that have come here at different times, that some of them do fight amongst themselves. And that when you read about some things back in history or mythology and things like that, that's actually some of what people were documenting that they saw in the sky, rather than it being a mythology or a story that was made up. It was actually things that used to be seen a lot, but now it's more covert. But he didn't really say more detail, which, looking at it in that perspective and listening to everybody's experiences, that does make sense to me.
Yeah.
That there's more than one group, and some of them don't like each other. They have different agendas, and we're mostly kept in the dark.
Yeah. Well, there could be some danger for them as too, because I mean, if you think about it, what happens? Anything detected, anything unauthorized detected in the United States airspace, fighters are going to get scrambled to intercept, right? And
They can catch them.
like, right. I mean, obviously they could easily evade anything we send up there, but maybe it increases the risk a bit for them to make themselves visible for me.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
because I mean, supposing we actually scored a hit on one of them, it would be bad. I mean, whether you get hit by a particle beam or a rock, you're just as dead. So they probably don't want to.
That's true.
You know what I mean? They really probably don't want to take the risk of attracting attention.
Well, we went
I'm
camping.
speculating.
That reminds me of that we did something, kind of see something similar, but we were in a campground out in the desert. I'm trying to remember. It was is it Red Rock
Red Rock Canyon.
Canyon. Not the one, not the Red Rock by you. It was in California. It's in the middle of the desert. It's at the base of these rock formations out in the middle of nowhere. And there was an entire campground full of people at dusk that saw everything. Like we all saw it and we all were talking about it the next day, that there was like a silver disc that was shooting around pretty fast and stopping on a dime. And pretty soon we heard like that familiar scream of a fighter jet going by, and it was like this thing was playing with it. It was like somebody on a ninja motorcycle was messing around with a kid on a tricycle.
Right.
Like this thing would dart around like super, super freaking fast, stop on a dime and wait for the jet to curve around. And then when they'd get closer, then he'd zip over somewhere else and do the same thing. And that was going on for a good 5 minutes. And everybody in the campground saw it. And we're all talking about it the next day. None of these people knew each other. And some people got scared and they left. We heard some people just like pull up stakes and leave. They didn't even wait for morning. And then some old timer was there and he's like, I camp here all the time. That's not the first time I've seen this here. And then, we kind of thought, well, that could have been an experimental that we have, right? But I don't know. There's no way that, I mean, I don't know what our military has, but that just seemed a little impossible for it to be ours.
That's what David Grush and Fravor, when they were asked about, that common question, when they were asked about the Tic Tac and other things, that they said, could this have been our own military testing experimental secret craft against its conventional non-secret stuff? And they said, no way, they would never do that. We have test ranges for that. You don't fly secret stuff next to non-secret stuff to see how the non-secret stuff reacts, because then there's, because everything involved is too expensive and you could have accidents. They said, no way. So,
well, how that sighting ended would kind of answer it for me, because it literally messed around with this jet, doing this snarky thing. And then it was sitting there, wait for the jet to come around again. And then it just literally zipped off straight up so freaking fast. I can't even, it looked impossible. It just zipped out, so fast down to a tiny dot up and then you're just looking at stars.
Well, and you guys in this talk have both said how intelligent these things are and seem to be, and something that has come up time and time again, or if you get somebody that's a skeptic or just a skeptic, you don't even have to go that far as a skeptic, but a skeptical person goes, well, for us to travel X to Y in space takes this long, and there's no way they could get here, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, you know what? And I apologize to everybody, because I'm always going, I'm not saying it's like a movie. I'm just saying my mind is always snapshot and movie scenes from Event Horizon when Sam Neill takes that photograph off the wall and he folds it in half to explain how the Event Horizon moves through space, right? And he's like, this is how far we have to go. And then he folds it and he pokes a hole in the middle and he goes, boop, space and time meets together. And, you know, and I'm not saying it's that simple. I'm just saying that we are bound by the shackles of, we assume that everyone else is like us or everything else is like us and are bound to our same shackles. And it's not true. Yeah. It's just not. And if they have been around for a zillion years or whatever it is, and they have the technology, yes, it might be flawed when it gets here. Yes, they might fight. And maybe Al was in some kind of an interstellar battle that night when, you know, the craft was bonked and he had to so rudely get, you know, tossed back into his bed the way he was, and was probably lucky that they didn't, you know, turn the ceiling back on too soon. But we like to think very highly of ourselves, I think, and that's good. Yeah, that's a good thing. But we need to just turn that down and go, you know what? There's probably a lot of other things out there that are way smarter than us, and maybe they've been around a really long time, and think about what they could do.
Yeah. Well, even our own tech can do all kinds of things that people believed to be totally impossible 100 years ago.
Right.
And I've heard that. I'm a skeptic myself. I like evidence, and I probably, if I had never had any unordinary experiences, I probably wouldn't believe any of the shit that came out of my mouth today. But I've experienced it. And so when people say, no, you can't travel from here to there in any reasonable amount of time, my answer is, well, yeah, you're correct. You cannot traverse linear space from here to the next star in any reasonable amount of time, because with a rocket blowing stuff out the back end to move yourself through space, you can't go faster than light speed. You're absolutely correct. But that's not what they're doing. I've seen them go from one place to another without traversing the intervening distance. I don't know how they do it, but I've seen them do it. They're not traversing the space between one point and another. They have some kind of technology where they can just blip from here to there wherever they want to be. And I mean, I understand somebody thinking I'm full of crap and not believing me, because I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen them do it.
You know what, Al? The next time someone says you're full of shit, you could just go out on your rock and take a few minutes and go, hey, you know what, homie, come on out here and let me show you what's up with being full of shit. And then see how they react.
Yeah. I mean, the same as seeing them, you know, we believe, according to our understanding of physics, solid objects can't pass through each other. Well, I've seen them step in through the walls of my house.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not ghosts. They're not spirits. They're in real physical bodies, and they did that. They have some kind of technology that can alter the characteristics of matter and phase solid objects through each other.
Yeah, that's not even woo.
They took me. It's just technology that we don't understand yet. They took me. They altered me, or they altered the glass of the window or the ceiling or whatever, and they didn't have to open anything to take me out. I went through the ceiling. I went out the window through the glass. I don't know how they did it, but...
Have you guys tried to talk to the shadow people at all and be like, what the F do you guys want now?
I've done it a little bit. Mine is more about, I'll leave you alone if you leave me alone. I just want to be left alone. I like to sleep. You know, if you want to like dance around in front of me, at least do it in the daytime. I mean, that would be great. But I've always, whenever I've gone in a new place, that's my general thing anyway, is I don't know who's living here. I don't want to seem like an intruder, but I'm pretty chill, and leave me alone. I'll leave you alone. You know, we can coexist, whatever. Just don't fucking scare me. You know?
Yeah, there's just such a-holes. Now, if you guys go on vacation for a week to an Airbnb or a hotel or something, is there full reprieve from that kind of crap, or do the shadow people sometimes even follow you around there?
It kind of feels like it's somebody else's. Like, I know, ever since I was a kid, you know, I'd walk into other people's houses and just certain things you sense. And there's It's almost like I always tell him, I call them people's monkeys. It's the monkey on your back, and my monkey's probably not your monkey. Maybe the monkeys are assigned. I don't know, but whatever's going on, it seems like maybe some things are attached to the place. Maybe it's the person and it moves with them, but sometimes some of the same things will happen, and other times there's nothing. But I mean, it's really hard to explain why. We saw. I mean, even on our honeymoon. I mean, come on.
Yeah, really.
Come on, guys, take a break.
Yeah.
At that time, there's still stuff going on at that time.
Okay, forgive me if you already did when I had to step away for a moment, but you want to tell her about the big event that precipitated us starting to talk and validate all of this stuff that we'd seen as kids to each other, shortly after we found each other again.
We had just got married, and this was, oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember how many years ago that was now. So we had just got married, and we moved into a new house together. He's an adult and in the Army now, but he has a son from a previous marriage, and he was a teenager at the time, and he was living with us as well. And we were living in this house. I sent you a sketch of this too. We were living in this house that kind of had this massive front property and then we were backed up against hills that went into like a mining, like a mining property that was fenced off. And so we were kind of secluded on like three sides. And it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. The whole house is snoring. The guys are snoring, the dogs are snoring. I'm the only one that's not asleep, and I'm really irritated. And I just give up and I get up. But part of that was that I'm sure, a lot of people talk about this. You've probably experienced this, where you just kind of feel prompted to look out the window or something like that. And there's no reason. I didn't hear anything. But when I kind of gave up and got up out of bed, I'm walking through the dark house, and something strongly draws me to the window. And it was like really urgent that I needed to look out the window at the front of the property. I look out there and I see 3 groups of, it's like 2 or 3 groups of 3 grays walking in very slowly in the front yard. And that's the first time that I had seen them as an adult since I was a kid. So it was kind of, the other stuff was kind of, memories I'd kept to myself. I hadn't told anyone about it, and it was kind of distant, not in the forefront at all. And so it was really shocking to see this. And each group had 2 small ones and 1 tall one. And it seems like they always, when I hear other people talk about it, it seems like that's a really common thing. And I'm looking through the blinds at that, and I'd say maybe they were down the hill like 50 feet away from the house. And it looked really odd because they were walking very, very, very slowly in kind of a line, like they were canvassing the ground, and they were looking down, looking at the ground for something. And it looked really strange because they were moving in a very odd way. They didn't look like they were taking a step, like you think of someone walking across the ground. What it looked like is that they were moving their legs in a really fluid walking motion, but their feet were not completely touching the ground, and it was too smooth, like they were on wheels. It was the weirdest thing. And what was really interesting is the next day, as we do, I decide I'm I'm going to Google this, okay? Because I'm sitting on it. I'm sitting on it for a while. In the morning, Al went off to work. His son went to school. And I'm sitting there in this empty house going, what the F did I just see? This is bringing back some memories. I don't know what to do with this. I'm not going to bother him about it before he goes to work. So I grab the handy dandy Google and I Google gray aliens. And then I put in strange movement or something like that. And it instantly takes me to a discussion online where this lady does not live very far from, okay, out of all the places that people could be typing, you know, online on this discussion board, this lady is literally like 5 miles down the road. She also lives up against the other side of the mining property. And it's just desolate on that side. And she says she looked in the backyard at night and saw a group of gray aliens, and they were moving exactly how I described. So then I just kind of went, okay, check, please. I need a break from this. This is really weird. But anyway, so during the event, I'm looking out there and I'm watching them do this. And I cannot believe what I'm seeing. This is a totally different experience from when I was a kid. It was like I knew the star people. I'd seen them before. Somehow we were familiar with each other, almost like family. And when I was a kid, I would be upset when they would leave. This was different. I got the creeping dread from what I was seeing. It was very different. And so I'm sitting there, I'm leaning over the couch, peering through the front drapes, and then I get that feeling again on my back that's facing the rest of the open house. And my hair is standing up and my skin is crawling. It's almost like my body knows what's standing behind me and is trying very hard to get the hell away from it, but I hadn't turned around and looked at what was behind me yet. And I heard in my head, like when they talk telepathically, but it was almost like there was this, it's kind of like what he said earlier, where he, quote, overheard them talking to each other. They weren't talking to him, but he was somehow, you're tuned in or something. I heard someone in that group of grays I was looking at in the front say to somebody that was standing behind me in my kitchen, say something like, or it was the other way around. Someone in my kitchen was talking to what I was looking at up front, and I heard the equivalent of "you've been seen." It was really weird because it wasn't quite all in my head. It was almost like there was a stream of communication kind of going over your head, and it was like almost like when you tune into a faint radio signal. It was fascinating and crazy at the same time. I mean, I was fascinated, but it was like, wow, I remember people speaking to me telepathically as a kid like that in some of these events. So I turned around and there is a gray standing about 10 feet away from me, just standing like a statue in like the dark kitchen, staring at me. Part of my lizard brain is trying to freak out. But instead what happens is he says to me, this would probably be a really good time to go back to bed and get the sleep that you so desperately need. Aren't you tired? And I went in my head, yeah, that's a great idea. And I just casually walked back in my bedroom, got in bed, and went to sleep. After he got home the next day, I finally decided that, you know what, I think it's time, because I know I'm not crazy, but this is just, okay, I can't keep this to myself. And So I decided when he got home that I wanted to make some time to sit down privately without his son around and talk to him about all the things that I saw, including him being floated out the window and everything when we were kids. And it was like the floodgates opened. He told me what he was experiencing when I wasn't there, me with him, and it was really great validation. And I do recall him mentioning that he thought at one point he saw me on the craft that he was on, but they weren't doing anything to me, and I didn't look like I was really all there. And I honestly don't remember that event, but I thought that was interesting. So that's kind of when we started comparing all our notes and our memories, and then that's when things started picking up as adults. And then we absolutely refused to talk about any of this, even within earshot of when his son was home. And then one day his son came to us and said that he saw someone in his room the night before. So we didn't want to freak out. At that point, we hadn't really gone down the rabbit hole and found out from other people that, yeah, it does tend to go in families. And, and I'm a really big believer in talking about everything. I think it doesn't help anyone to hide stuff if it's going to be helpful for someone else. And even though it may be difficult, but we did decide we didn't want to freak him out because he wasn't, that we know of, raised, believing this. Or, Al certainly didn't talk about it around him when he was younger. So we let him tell us about his experience, and he said he saw what looked like he described a gray in his room. And it was interesting because the night that he said he had this first experience, we were upstairs and you can hear everything downstairs in this house. And so we heard him come out of his room at like 1 a.m. or something and get a snack in the kitchen and then go back in his room. And I didn't hear him close the door, and we heard like a thud on the floor. And didn't think anything of it at all. And he said, well, I got hungry. He's hanging out on his phone too late. And then he got hungry. So he went in and he got a snack in the kitchen. I said, oh yeah, I heard you do that. And he said, well, I don't want you guys to think I'm crazy. But when I walked back into the room, I didn't even have a chance to close the door. And I saw this small gray person standing in my room, and he raised his hand and had like this silver rod thing, and he pointed it at me, and I fell on the floor. I was trying to go for my bed, to like hide behind the bed, and he said he kind of became paralyzed halfway there, and he just kind of landed on the floor instead. And then he woke up in the morning in his bed.
On top of the blankets.
On top of the blankets, yeah. So we had to make the decision after he had a second experience like that to kind of gingerly approach the subject with him and talk to him. And we even had somebody we knew that he really liked, who was also an experience, talk to him too, and try to kind of normalize it in some way and do they always bring you back. And so,
yeah,
we don't really know what's going on, but we didn't want him to grow up like people we know, thinking that they were crazy and wanting to kill themselves. Yeah. So we had to make that decision. And we've known other people who kind of had to cross that same intersection, and had to try and decide, well, what do you do? So yeah, it's not all fun and games and pleasant and, like we were talking about before.
There's just something, it's dark enough, and then you're going, oh, so you're messing with my kid. Great. That's awesome. Do you guys recall what age he was when you found out about those first couple of sightings of the gray?
You mean his experience that he reported to us?
I think it was
about 16.
16, 15,
Right around
16.
16, yeah. And it was interesting when I questioned him more about it. It was interesting that he said that when the gray pointed the device at him and paralyzed him, he said he tried to scream, but he couldn't make any noise. And he also said that he didn't fall asleep. He had no sensation of being asleep. Just instantly, the next thing he knew, it was daylight and he was in bed. So he had missing time for the rest of the night.
Oh boy. Well, and the silver thing with the ball at the end sounds exactly like what you saw with that box that was like the Hellraiser box experience.
Yeah, it did. It did sound very similar. And I thought, oh boy, all right, son, we gotta have a talk, right? Because I was never gonna tell him about any of this stuff. But then, right, if it's happening to him, I figured at least I could tell him that they've taken me many, many times, and they always bring me back, and I'm, I don't like it, but I'm not missing or dead, or so that was the best I could do for him, is to tell him, no, you're not crazy, and you're not the only person it's happened to, and they always bring you back, at least, so.
Yeah, and just as an aside, we have definitely discovered that, you can absolutely have a mental illness and also be an experiencer.
Yeah.
You just because somebody says that they see something that seems crazy and maybe they do have some issues doesn't mean that they're not actually seeing that too. And
you can also become mentally ill from the stress of being an abductee.
Yes. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg thing,
Right.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Maybe I would be if I didn't have Nuna to talk to. If she wasn't there, if I never got any of the confirmation that, when we were growing up together and she saw them take me, and then with my dad where he saw, at least the part that he wasn't in stasis for. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I would be mentally if I had no validation, no corroboration, and nobody to talk to.
Do you think that somehow, and this is getting, maybe the word is woo, I don't know, maybe too woo or out there, but do you think that somehow they knew that you guys needed each other for support? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if that sounds really strange, but I don't know. You have this other friend that is also married to someone else that has the exact same experiences as well.
I don't know. I can tell you that when the manted lady came into my room.
The manted lady.
Yeah. When she came into my room, one of the things she told me that kept me from suiciding was that I would be with her again in this lifetime. Nuna, sorry.
I got it. No problem.
That Nuna would be back, and I would not spend this entire lifetime separated from her, because at that time we had lost track of each other. It was 26 years that we were missing each other, and the entire time we both knew that we were supposed to be together, and it was wrong that we didn't know where each other was. And I used to, every few months during that entire 26 years, every few months I used to go to where her grandma's house was, where her grandparents didn't live there anymore. And the cow fields were all gone. It was all housing tracts and strip malls by that time. But her grandparents' house was still there, no longer surrounded by cow fields. And for 26 years that we were apart and didn't know how to find each other, every couple of months I went and sat on the curb in the cul-de-sac behind that house.
And so did I, but we just didn't know.
We missed each other, and I could tell. I knew that she had been there, and I was just hoping that I would happen to be there at the right time. I could feel it. I knew she'd been there.
Wow, that is incredible.
And for 26 years I did this, and she did it too, and we were never there at the same time. Which is another thing we found out that we were doing when we got back together.
And then the day we got married, we went and sat there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah, I know. I've heard there's a theory that, I've heard that there might be a breeding program with some of them, and they like to play matchmaker for the DNA. But in our case, we didn't have kids together. So I always thought that was interesting, but that doesn't feel like that's what this was. I've heard that people volunteer to come here to accomplish something, but they just don't remember that when they're in a body here. I've heard that. I've heard that people reincarnate close together, but sometimes their relationships will be mixed up from life to life, like it might be a parent-child or a couple or something. I've heard that. I've heard some different speculation. I'm fascinated by all of like everything that people have kind of speculated to see, like, well, you could see where this would fit or that would fit. It makes sense. And I think it's really interesting. But
all right, so here's a speculation, but this one's pretty dark. But it's not like you guys haven't heard this. But this would be the ultimate you do not have my consent scenario. What if you guys have had a child or children and they're just up there with, Sandy and the buds flying around and you don't get to know them, and for whatever reason you don't have any rights to them?
we actually met a few people that was their experience, and we've thought about that. That's a good question.
I don't know if my DNA has been used for that hybrid program that people talk about. I don't know if I have any hybrid offspring anywhere. I've never, like some people have been shown their hybrid offspring. As far as I know, I've never had that experience. But in some of the limited conversations I've been able to have with them, when they give me the strong impression that one of the reasons they didn't want me ending up dead this time around is that this isn't the first lifetime that they've tried to do something with me, and I tend to get dead prematurely from being too fearless at other times and places, and that they really don't want it to happen this time around.
No. Yeah, I think he's the most fearless person I've ever met. He's pretty tenacious too, so I can totally see
and
that.
And also, I don't know if they're telling me the truth when they've said that, but then there's also the thing where, when my family moved in across from her grandparents, and then when her grandma came and introduced her to me, and for us,
we already knew each other. For us,
it was a reunion. It wasn't an introduction. You remember that?
Right. Yeah.
Talking about it, and the reason for that is because even back then, as soon as I saw her, a flood of memories came back, and I remembered other lifetimes with her as my partner, and that I was supposed to find her again this time around. I mean, I was 5 years old, and that all hit me in the face as soon as I saw her. That's a whole nother bag of woo, but that's when we get to talking about these things, that's one of the reasons that we think that all of this stuff is all connected.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because, going to, other people we know who have had similar experiences, everybody who's an abductee has other things that go along with it, has other experiences and memories that go along with it that are like that you would just, you would think initially is a bag of woo and not related to, being an abductee, like being, just being picked up by people with better tech than us and being experimented on. But everybody we know who has the experience of being an abductee also has
shadow people.
They also got shadow people hanging around. They also remember past lives. They also, so it's hard for me to I run out of words to describe some of this, but that, I'm a natural skeptic myself, and I would dismiss all of this as nonsense, except that it's in my face, and I've had the experience, and other people I know have the exact same experiences, and there's several what looks to me like unrelated phenomena that it's a whole suite of phenomena that always occur together.
I think people tend to, because, humans fear what we can't explain or know for the most part, not every individual. But so I think a lot of people they get really scared. They get really fearful with some of the topics. And so they tend to attach to the ones that are less threatening. So, we've had people we've talked to that say, well, I'm not going to entertain any negativity or negative talk about, I choose to believe that everything's positive. And I really fear for those people, because that's going to be really difficult, and it doesn't feel true. I think you really have to look at all of it. And I really do feel like it's like you're going through a movie when you watch a movie where you are as much in the dark as the main character who hasn't figured out what's going on yet. And you're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, because it seems like there's some systematic thing in place, and maybe there's some connections you've made, maybe not, but you don't know if those are correct. And nobody's ever telling you the full storyline. And so, like I said, you're kind of left to fill in the gaps, but you don't know if that's correct either. So, which is why we all get together like this and talk, because, I want to compare notes with other people too. And I've always found good actually comes out of that, because you eventually will meet somebody that's got the same experience, and maybe somebody who hasn't, but they, like you, if you're not an abductee, you have the ability to sit back and look at some possible connections that, because we're in the deep of it, that we can't see. We can't stand back and see. It's just very helpful for people to get together and talk about all of it. And I definitely do think everything's related, but that's also from my culture too.
All right. So final question for you guys is, would you rather have not had any of this stuff happen to you at all? 0% of it.
No. Truth over comfort.
I always prefer the truth to comfort, even if I can't get at the whole truth.
I prefer to look at things head on and raw, no matter how uncomfortable it is. I always want the truth.
Yeah, I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't change anything. Even though what I know is terribly incomplete, I would rather know it and be uncomfortable than not know it and be comfortable.
I don't want to be in the dark, even though it does bring up even more questions, but I'd rather get part of it than none of it. So
I can understand that. And if someone says they're an expert, you guys are always in those proper shoes, you run like hell. Because they say they have the answers, you freaking run.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, as much experience as we have, and we have to say that we don't know and we don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really believe anybody who's putting himself out as an expert who says they know everything about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I understand that people like you or people like Debbie that I've talked to or Shanna that have very similar experiences as you guys. Of course, you know more than me, because as you just used the term in the thick of it, in the deep of it, I think is what you said very aptly. You, of course, know more than I do because you've been through it. But yeah, those folks out there going, well, I'm gonna write the quintessential book that answers every single question that you guys have ever asked. You're going, that is impossible, but you're cute though.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you could get it straight from the horse's mouth. The horse may look like a gray or a Nordic or whatever, but honestly, I know I sound like a negative Nelly, but they lie. Everybody that speaks, and no matter how they do or where they come from, has the ability to be deceptive. And so I can't even trust anything I've been directly told. So I don't.
Right. And that's from them, and they're doing it to you. So, yeah.
They told me So all the answers I've got from them of questions I've asked them, I don't know if they're telling me the truth or not.
Right.
They could be lying out their asses the entire time, and I don't have any way to verify it.
We just know they're real.
Yeah.
That's about all we know.
But, you know, some of the people putting them out there, putting themselves out as experts that they're really not. Not all of them are necessarily lying. Some of them are terrified, and they're making up stories for themselves to feel better because that's how they have to cope with it.
That's true.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can't blame people for that.
No.
I'm scared. You know, I don't show it, but I am.
Also, can I say, in the experience of Al being this badass and calling this craft in, I think it's really cool, by the way. That experience, though, because this, for me, this is why it probably goes into, you know, my mind is normally going to things being connected, but I don't want to glance over the fact that not only did they bring in an insect that in Nuna's culture they knew would get her outside because they're messengers, but I don't want to glance over the fact that they were there in the first place. Does that mean that they can control bugs around the earth? Did they manifest those? Were those even really there? Like, what's the thinking on that with you guys? I said last question before. I was lying. We all lie. There you go. The dragonflies are a little, the craft is cool, obviously, but the dragonflies are like throwing me off, and I think that those are cool too. What are your thoughts on the dragonflies? Were those actually there? Like, did they look weird in any way? Because they were throwing shadows. You said you noticed some shadows outside. What are thoughts on the dragonflies to get you guys outside to see the craft showing off?
Well, so I've seen them. I've seen dragonflies show up at traditional daytime ceremonies before.
Okay.
In areas where you normally don't see a lot of them, or we weren't by water or anything. And when they showed up on this occasion, we had the drapes. It was hotter than hell outside, so we had the drapes drawn, but we had these flitting, like a cloud of flitting, moving things, a shadow on the drapes. So I peeked over there, and after he said, "Oh, they're dragonflies," he looked first, and there wasn't just like 3 or 4, there was a swarm, like a cloud. And so when we went outside and we were looking at them, they made a column that was like, they were flying in this column that was like 2 feet wide by 6 or 7 feet tall in a column. And when we went outside to look at them, they looked normal. They're really large, but they looked normal. And they were just furiously flying in like this column. And then the column rose a little bit higher. So you were made to stand there and look up with the sky behind them. You weren't looking across, like, parallel to the ground. They actually made it so that you'd have to look up at the sky to see them. And then when we saw the craft flew in that section of the sky. When you're already looking at the dragonflies, they passed behind them. So it seemed really purposeful when you think about it in that way. It didn't seem really unusual to me because I've seen that at traditional ceremonies before. And it's really special when they show up at powwows. If you've ever been to a public powwow, when they show up in the arena to dance with the dancers, that's really special too. But along with that, we've also had, especially myself, through my entire life, I've had experiences with owls, very up close and personal experiences with owls, which is very cultural. And people did die. My previous husband passed away after a very close encounter with an owl. So, and that seems purposeful too. So you have a really good question that, how purposeful is this? Can they control other things like that? In the traditions, it's our ancestors communicating with us. But we also believe that star people who seeded us here can control things like that as well. That's why we have, animals are supposed to be our teachers. And the owl is a messenger and communicator as well. But you have to be, I will say one thing though, you have to be really, really careful. Sorry, my dog's making noise. You have to be really careful who you ask about things like that, especially with owls, because there are tribes, like a lot of my Navajo friends, you don't talk to them about owls. It's not a good thing.
Right.
But for me, that's part of my tribal name is Owl, and I'm from Bear Clan, but it's also part of my name. And so we have strong beliefs about that. So I guess it depends on who you ask. That event seemed really purposeful though to me, and I didn't really question it as anything else.
From my perspective, I would say that if they can reach into my mind and make me see my great grandmother instead of a 9-foot tall mantid, probably the mind of an insect telling them to go somewhere and hang out for a few minutes is not much of a challenge for them.
Yeah, I would hazard to say you're spot on, because that whole formula that they use to get you guys outside to have that shared experience, which is what you asked for, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, I just like I said before, they're telepathic. They have instant access to anything that's in your brain, your memories, what you're doing, your beliefs, what's culturally relevant to you, and they can be anywhere in space and time that they want. Well, there wouldn't be any challenge for them at all to arrange, with those abilities, to arrange an event like that.
Right.
Just reach out and pull together the whatever is local that's going to get you to go outside and look up and then fly by.
It's a very uncomfortable thought, though, knowing that somebody else that doesn't share all the information can do things like that. I know a lot of people are really uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, they are. But I think that something that you keep bringing up is how important it is for everybody to share the data points that they know, the data points that they have. All we can do is speculate and compare notes. And you know what? It's still just as important, even though we're not saying we have any answers. Who knows if we will get them? Even the ones that have them, they dangle carrots and they say just enough to you, right? So that's very frustrating. But I think even the dog is going, Shannon, be quiet. How long are you going to talk to my mom and dad? But no, I want to mention the drawings before we go. That you sent along to me. You've already given me permission in the email to use them. If anybody wants to see these sketches and drawings, go to intothefrayradio.com and go to this episode. I think I'm going to use the beautiful gray drawing with the purple background as the episode image. Is that Sandy? It just says the one in charge, basically. I can't, I've had him open for quite a while and he's just kind of staring at me while we're chatting, and I'm going, I just can't imagine seeing something like that, like in your bedroom, in your safe space. So much nope. But okay.
Yes.
Before we go, anything I should have asked you guys, or any closing thoughts?
My closing thought is thank you for talking to us. Thank you for being the kind of person we're willing to talk to, because there hasn't been any others. Like we said, we refuse to go on other shows. And I just hope that putting our story out there will add another data point to the incomplete pool of information on this subject, and maybe help some other people who have experiences that they don't understand. Maybe just put another piece of the puzzle together for them, the same as has been done for us listening to others.
We're a big believer in helping other people when we can, and people have helped us in different ways. We like to pay it back, pay it forward. If anybody gets in touch with you, it's fine to share my email. And we're still contemplating. We've been asked to write a book with our friends, so we're kind of thinking about that. We haven't really decided, but
well, I can see why after talking to you guys today. But I just say, in my closing thought is, I am so flattered that you guys chose me to share all of this with. I didn't know that. that means really a
Yeah.
whole lot to me.
Well, I recognize a really good interviewer. You have excellent interviewing techniques, and it's something that I had to be trained in professionally, and I just really appreciate your style. I really appreciate how you approach people, and you have really great energy, and we really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys too. And I know that we will be in contact, of course. I do want to stay in touch with you guys, but I will certainly forward any correspondence I will get. I know that I will get it, especially with shows like this. I tend to get the most, and there's good reason for that. We all know there's a lot more people out there, and this is proof that it helps so much just to get as Al said, get those data points out there. That's all we can do. And even if one falls into place for one person to validate their experience, then it's all worth it.
Yes. And let us know if we can do anything else for you.